Make yourself useful. Piper. This isn't a social call. My father's voice didn't just carry across the check-in desk. It slashed through the expensive air of the country club lobby. The room smelled of sea salt, old leather, and that specific, metallic scent of wealth that tries too hard. Around me, women in silk gowns and men in bespoke tuxedos were laughing, clinking champagne flutes, and adjusting their cufflinks. I looked down at my hands. In my left hand, I held a clipboard. In my right, a neon green lanyard. It was cheap polyester, the kind that scratches your neck, and it dangled there like a noose. The plastic card inside read, in bold, block letters, support staff, Anthony. My father adjusted his bow tie in the mirror behind the desk. Not even looking at me. He was 62, silver-haired, and radiated the kind of arrogance that comes from never having been told no in your entire life. Put it on, he snapped, finally turning his gaze to me. It wasn't a look of affection. It was the look a CEO gives a malfunctioning printer. We need someone manning the front while the family takes the stage. Don't embarrass us. I put the lanyard over my head. The green ribbon clashed violently with the simple black dress I'd worn, hoping, foolishly, that tonight might be different. That tonight, at the Diamond and Dust Charity Gala, I might be a daughter, not an employee. The indignity wasn't just in the cheap plastic against my chest. It was visceral. It was the way the ocean breeze outside felt cold against my skin. The way the perfume of the woman passing by smelled like roses and dismissal. It was the visual confirmation that in the ecosystem of my family, I wasn't just at the bottom of the food chain, I was the soil they walked on. Have you ever had a family member who treated your career or your life choices like a joke? Drop a yes in the comments and tell me where you're listening from tonight. We need to support each other. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was just the latest transaction in a deficit that had been accruing interest for 34 years. Rewind to 3 hours ago. The family prep meeting in the penthouse suite. You're good with spreadsheets, right? Make yourself useful. That was the extent of my greeting. I had walked into the suite, dressed for the gala, holding a gift I'd picked out for the charity auction. Anthony didn't even look at it. He just tossed a guest list at my chest. It hit me with a soft thud before sliding to the floor. Brittany needs help steaming her train. My mother, Suzanne, added. She was sitting by the window, sipping a mimosa, scrolling through comments on the foundation's social media page, and double-checked the donor bags. We don't want cheap chocolate like last year. It reflects poorly on us. I stood there, the guest list in one hand, my own dignity in the other. I looked at Brittany. She was 26, glowing in a custom gold gown that cost more than the down payment on my apartment. She was the face of the foundation, the influencer, the golden child. She winked at me, not a wink of solidarity, but a wink of complicity. It said, "We both know our roles, don't we?" I sparkle. You scrub? And I accepted it. I picked up the list. I nodded. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the clipboard through the window. I just went silent. Because silence is a survival strategy. Because when you grow up in a house where your worth is measured exclusively by your utility, you learn to become a Swiss Army knife. You learn that if you stop being useful, you stop existing. It is an invisible chain, forged link by link over decades. Every good girl. Every, you're so reliable. Every, we couldn't manage without you was a lock snapping shut around my potential. I wasn't weak. I was conditioned. I was a survivor of a psychological war I didn't even know I was fighting. They saw a boring bookkeeper. A quiet, mousy woman who was good with math and bad with people. A convenient little resource to manage the boring details while they soaked up the spotlight. What they didn't see, what they couldn't possibly imagine, in their wildest, most arrogant dreams was who I actually was when I wasn't in their shadow. They didn't know that good with spreadsheets was the understatement of the century. They didn't know that my boring accounting job was actually a high-level position as a senior forensic auditor for a firm that hunted financial criminals for Fortune 500 companies. I didn't just balance checkbooks. I found the bodies buried in the numbers. I traced embezzlement schemes through shell companies in the Caymans. I had put CFOs in federal prison with nothing but a highlighter and a discrepancy in column B. In my world, I was a shark. In their world, I was the bait. But as I adjusted that neon green lanyard in the lobby, feeling the scratch of the polyester against my skin, something inside me finally shifted. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet, metallic click of a lock opening. The chain broke. I looked at Anthony's back as he walked away to greet a donor, his laugh booming and fake. I looked at Brittany posing for a photographer, her smile perfect and practiced. And I realized something profound. They weren't my family. They were my targets. And I wasn't the support staff. I was the investigation. Is there a problem? Piper? Anthony called back, sensing my hesitation, his eyes narrowing. No problem, I said. My voice was steady, cold. I'm just getting organized. I wasn't lying. I was getting organized. The gala was starting. The guests were arriving. And I was about to perform the most aggressive audit of my life. I stood at the check-in desk, smiling politely as I handed a donor his table assignment. But my mind wasn't in the lobby. It was 6 months in the past. That was when the real work had begun. I hadn't spent the last half-year knitting. I had spent it hunting. It started with a single anomaly. A rounding error in the family's quarterly report that Anthony had foolishly asked me to clean up for tax season. He thought he was handing me a mop. He didn't realize he was handing a forensic auditor the murder weapon. I didn't need to hack into the mainframe or rappel down an elevator shaft. I just needed to look. I opened the digital books, and I didn't sleep for weeks. I lived in the glow of my monitors, tracing the digital footprint of my family's greed. It was a masterclass in mismanagement. I fast-forwarded through 5 years of financial rot. I traced every dollar that came in and every dollar that vanished. The patterns emerged like invisible ink under a blacklight. Brittany wasn't just a spoiled sister. She was a massive liability. I found monthly transfers of $12,000 labeled marketing consulting. There was no marketing. There was no consulting. The routing numbers went straight to a shell LLC that paid the lease on her Range Rover and her credit card bills for those business trips to Tulum. Then there was Anthony, my father, the CEO. I found withdrawals totaling $200,000 marked as venue deposits and vendor retainers. But when I cross-referenced the vendor tax IDs, they didn't belong to caterers or event planners. They belonged to offshore holding companies known for processing high-stakes gambling debts. The realization hit me in the middle of a Tuesday night, illuminated by the harsh blue light of my laptop. The Diamond and Dust Charity Gala wasn't a fundraiser. It was a laundering operation. They were taking donations meant for underprivileged children and using them to patch the holes in their own sinking ship. They were robbing orphans to pay for tuxedos. I didn't cry. Tears are useless in an audit. I didn't scream. Screaming alerts the target. I got precise. I spent the next 3 months compiling the receipts. I downloaded every forged invoice. I captured every time-stamped email where Susan approved the transfers. I matched every stolen dollar to a frivolous purchase. I condensed 5 years of felony embezzlement into a single, encrypted file. I named it The Ledger. I loaded it onto a brushed steel USB drive, encrypted with a password only I knew. Back in the lobby, the music swelled. Anthony was laughing near the bar, holding a glass of scotch paid for by a donor who thought he was saving the world. He looked powerful. He looked safe. I slipped my hand into my pocket and touched the cool metal of the USB drive. It felt heavy, like a loaded gun. He thought I was standing here to check coats. He didn't know I was holding the detonator. The ballroom doors opened, and the crowd surged forward. A tide of silk and ambition. I stayed at my post, smiling until my cheeks hurt. Checking names off a list that meant nothing. Piper. Water. Now. Brittany swept past me, not breaking her stride. She didn't ask. She commanded. She was surrounded by a phalanx of photographers. Her head thrown back in a laugh that looked effortless, but had been rehearsed in front of a mirror for hours. I grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler beneath the desk and hurried after her. My lanyard bouncing against my chest. I handed it to her. She took it without looking at me, handing her empty champagne flute to me in exchange. Thanks, she murmured to the air above my head. Already turning to pose for another photo, I stood there, holding her empty glass. Watching my family ascend the stage. The lights dimmed. The spotlight hit them. They looked perfect. Anthony stood center stage, flanked by Susan and Brittany. He raised his hands, silencing the applause he felt entitled to. Welcome, everyone, he boomed, his voice rich and confident. Tonight isn't just about charity. It's about legacy. It's about integrity. The crowd murmured appreciatively. We built this foundation on the principles of transparency and trust, he continued, placing a hand on his heart. Because when you give, you should know exactly where your money is going. I stood in the shadows near the AV booth. The irony so thick, it tasted like copper. Integrity, transparency, trust. He truly believed it. That was the terrifying part. He had convinced himself that his theft was justified, that his lifestyle was a necessity, that the world owed him this adoration. He looked out at the crowd, beaming. He saw donors. He saw admirers. He saw a kingdom he ruled. He didn't see me. I was invisible. I was the support staff. I was the girl with the spreadsheets who fixed the problems and kept her mouth shut. I was the infrastructure he stood on. So essential and so silent that he forgot I could collapse. He signaled to the AV technician. And now, a look at the incredible work your generosity has made possible. The lights dimmed further. The crowd turned toward the massive projection screen behind the stage. This was it. I stepped into the AV booth. The technician, a young guy named Kevin, who I'd helped with an invoice issue earlier, looked up, surprised. Hey, Piper, need something? Just checking the feed, I said, my voice calm. Mind if I plug in? He shrugged. Go for it. I pulled the brushed steel USB drive from my pocket. It was cold in my hand. I plugged it into the main console, on stage. Anthony was still smiling, basking in the applause, waiting for the video that would celebrate his greatness. He looked so confident, so safe. He didn't know that the floor was about to drop out. The projection screen flickered once, a heartbeat of static. Then, the charity highlight reel, the montage of smiling orphans and slow-motion handshakes that Anthony had paid a production company $20,000 to curate vanished. The room went black. For 3 seconds. There was total darkness, the kind of heavy, suffocating silence that sucks the air out of a room. The string quartet stopped mid-measure. The clinking of silverware ceased. 300 wealthy donors held their breath, expecting a technical glitch. A fuse blowing. A mistake. They didn't get a mistake. They got a spreadsheet. The screen roared back to life. But the image was stark, high contrast, and blindingly bright. It wasn't a video. It was a static document. A black background with rows of jagged, red text that spanned 20 feet high. Unauthorized withdrawals, 2019 to 2024. Source, Charitable Trust, P. Sterling Private Holding Status. Fraudulent. The hum of the projector fan sounded like a jet engine in the silence. On stage, Anthony froze. He stood with his arms still half raised, his smile curdling into a rictus of confusion. He looked back at the screen, blinking against the glare. I watched his eyes scan the text. I watched the exact moment the neural pathways connected. The moment the words stopped being pixels and started being a prison sentence. He turned back to the crowd, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He looked for Susan. He looked for Brittany. He looked for anyone who could explain why his coronation had just turned into an autopsy. I stepped out of the shadows of the AV booth. I didn't rush. I didn't run. I walked with the measured, predatory pace of someone who has already secured the perimeter. I picked up a wireless microphone from the tech table. I flipped the switch. The feedback squeal pierced the room, a sharp, electronic shriek that made the donors wince. "Can we get the house lights up? Please?" My voice boomed through the speakers. Amplified, distorted, and absolute. The technician, Kevin, hit the faders. The ballroom flooded with light. There was nowhere to hide. The shadows retreated, leaving Anthony exposed on that stage. Squinting, sweating, small, I looked at him, really looked at him. For my entire life, Anthony had been a titan. He was the man who commanded rooms, who signed checks with a flourish, who wore $5,000 suits and spoke about market volatility and strategic positioning. He radiated power. He smelled like power. But standing there, holding the microphone, looking at him trembling under the harsh stage lights, I had a sudden, clinical revelation. It was the illusion of the empty wallet. We equate money with character. We assume that if a man wears a tuxedo, he possesses dignity. We assume that if a man stands on a stage, he possesses authority. But Anthony didn't possess any of it. He was leasing it. He was a tenant in his own life, paying the rent with stolen currency. His confidence wasn't a personality trait, it was a byproduct of my bank account. His arrogance wasn't strength. It was the luxury of someone who has never had to pay for his own mistakes because he had a daughter to liquidate. Strip away the money I earned, the money I managed, the money I quietly transferred to cover his overdrafts. And what was left? Nothing. Just a 62-year-old man in a rented tuxedo, terrified of a spreadsheet. The realization washed over me like ice water. I wasn't angry anymore. You can't be angry at an equation that is finally balanced. I felt a cold, pristine clarity. "I apologize for the interruption," I said. My voice was calm, conversational, the voice I used when presenting a forensic audit to a board of directors. "The video you were expecting has been redacted." "Piper!" Anthony shouted from the stage. His voice cracked. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "What are you doing? Get down from there. She's having an episode. Cut the mic." He looked at the sound booth, his eyes wild. "Cut the mic." Kevin didn't move. He crossed his arms and leaned back. He liked me. He didn't like Anthony. "This isn't a technical difficulty, Anthony," I said, addressing him by his first name. It felt like a violation of the natural order. And the crowd gasped softly. "It's a financial disclosure." "Security!" Anthony screamed. "Remove her." 2 security guards near the exit took a half step forward. But they hesitated. They looked at the screen. They looked at the red numbers. They looked at me, standing calm and professional in my support staff lanyard, holding the microphone like a gavel. They were paid to stop drunks and crashers, not whistleblowers. They stayed put. "You wanted to talk about integrity," I continued, walking slowly toward the center of the room. The crowd parted for me. Women pulled their dresses back as if I were radioactive. Men stared at me with a mix of horror and fascination. "You wanted to talk about transparency," So let's be transparent. I pointed the remote at the screen and clicked. The slide changed. It wasn't a general summary anymore. It was a line item extraction. A specific date. A specific vendor. A specific amount. Date, February 14. 2023 amount, $12. 000 recipient, Elite Motors LLC memo. Marketing consulting actual, lease payment, Range Rover, Brittany. A murmur rippled through the room like a wave. I heard a woman whisper. That's the car she posted on Instagram. Brittany. I said, turning to look at my sister. She was standing near the stage. Her face, the color of ash. She clutched her designer purse as if it contained the antidote to this poison. Nice car. Did the orphans enjoy the test drive? Piper. Stop! Susan cried out from the front table. She stood up, knocking over her wine glass. Red liquid stained the white tablecloth, spreading like a gunshot wound. We can talk about this. Not here, not like this. We tried talking. I said, 3 hours ago. You told me to steam a dress and check a coat. You told me my place was in the service entrance. I clicked the remote again. Date. August. Tray. 2023 amount, $45. 000 recipient, Vegas Holdings Int. Memo, venue deposit actual, gambling debt settlement, Anthony. The gasp was louder this time. Distinct. Sharp. This wasn't just mismanagement. This was vice. This was sin. You told the board that $45,000 was for the venue deposit for next year's gala. I said, looking up at Anthony. He was gripping the podium so hard his knuckles were white. But the venue doesn't take deposits in Bitcoin. Anthony. And they certainly don't operate out of a shell company in Nevis. Lies. Anthony bellowed. She's lying. She's sick. I've been supporting her for years. Supporting me? I asked. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The data was screaming for me. Let's check the ledger. I clicked again. The screen filled with a waterfall of transactions. Hundreds of them. Scrolling down like the credits of a tragedy. Transfer from P. Sterling savings is greater than Anthony personal transfer from P. Sterling 401k is greater than Foundation General transfer from P. Sterling liquid assets is greater than Brittany Visa. My name is Piper Sterling. I said to the room. I am a senior forensic auditor. And for the last 5 years, I haven't just been your daughter. I have been your bank. I turned to the crowd. And as of tonight, the bank is closed. The silence that followed was heavy. It wasn't the empty silence of a pause, it was the dense, gravitational silence of a black hole absorbing every ounce of oxygen in the room. Anthony tried to speak. He opened his mouth, but the charisma was gone. The titan of industry was malfunctioning. All that came out was a wet, strangulated noise. I didn't give him time to reboot. I wasn't done. An audit doesn't end when you find the first error. It ends when you find the bottom. Let's look at the breakdown. I said. My voice was the only thing moving in the room. Because the devil isn't just in the details. He's in the expenses. I clicked the remote. The screen shifted. A single transaction highlighted in neon yellow against the black void. Line item. EQ's dirt. Bay. Sterling brand consulting amount, $50,000 date, June 12. Lanyard Archasen, $50,000. I read aloud. I enunciated every syllable. Paid to Brittany Sterling for brand consulting, on the same day the foundation laid off 3 caseworkers due to budget cuts. I looked at Brittany. She was trembling so hard her gold sequins were shimmering like a distress signal. Brittany, I said. My tone conversational. Almost polite. Can you tell the room what brand strategy you developed for 50 grand? Was it the Instagram post where you tagged the foundation while drinking a mimosa on a yacht? Because by my calculations, that post cost the orphans $4,000 per like. She burst into tears. It was a reflex. A defense mechanism that had worked on our parents since she was a toddler. But tears don't work on forensic auditors. Tears are just moisture. They don't balance a ledger. She worked hard. Susan shrieked from the table, clutching her pearls like they were a life raft. She brought awareness. She brought receipts. I corrected. For designer handbags. For spa treatments. For a life she didn't earn. I clicked the remote again. The screen refreshed. Line item 318. Vegas Holdings Int. Amount $200,000. Date September 01. 2023 note. Urgent wire. A gasp rippled through the crowd. This wasn't a salary. This wasn't a perk. This was a hemorrhage. $200,000. I said. Wired to a debt consolidation firm in Nevada. Anthony. Do you want to explain this one? Or should I read the email thread where you begged them not to break your legs? Anthony lunged toward the edge of the stage. His face was a mask of purple rage. That was an investment. A bridge loan. You don't understand high finance. You stupid girl, you're twisting everything. Am I? I hit the next slide. It wasn't a spreadsheet this time. It was a scanned document. A bank authorization form. This is the transfer order. I said. Authorized by the CEO. Signed by the treasurer. I used the laser pointer. A red dot danced over the signature line. That's your signature. Anthony. And right next to it, I moved the dot to the second line. Suzanne. You countersigned. You watched him drain the liquidity. And you handed him the pen. Susan sank back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. The room turned to look at her. The enabler. The accomplice. The woman who smiled at galas while her husband looted the vault. It's a forgery, Anthony screamed. He was desperate now. Flailing. She faked it. She's obsessed with ruining us. She's been jealous of her sister for years. She's mentally unstable. He looked out at the crowd, pleading with his peers. You know me. You know my character. This girl has been off her medication for weeks. It was a good spin. It was the villain's spin. The classic attempt to discredit the whistleblower by attacking her sanity. A few donors looked at each other. Uncertain. Was it possible? Was the quiet, mousy daughter actually crazy? I didn't argue. I didn't get defensive. I just pressed the spacebar. The final slide appeared. It was the summary page. The grand total. The bottom line. Total misappropriated funds, 2019 to 2024, $1,600,000. The number was so large it seemed abstract. But underneath it, I had listed the sources. From Piper Sterling, $450. 000 from charitable donations, $1. eBay Whoosher. Ling ling ling. That was the kill shot. If I had just shown them the money he stole from me, they might have pitied me. They might have seen it as a messy family squabble. But I showed them the money he stole from them. I saw the realization hit the room like a physical wave. The man in the tuxedo at table 4, he realized his $10,000 donation didn't buy textbooks. It bought Anthony's poker chips. The woman in the emerald gown realized her silent auction bid didn't build a well, it leased Brittany's rover. The pity vanished. The confusion vanished. It was replaced by fury. The murmurs grew into a roar. Chairs scraped against the floor as people stood up. Not to leave, but to get a better look at the thief on stage. $1,600,000. I said into the microphone. That is the price of your integrity. Anthony, you didn't build a legacy. You built a Ponzi scheme. And you used your own daughter as the collateral. Anthony looked at the screen. He looked at the crowd. He saw the anger in their eyes. The disgust. He saw his social standing. His reputation. His entire carefully constructed identity dissolving into ash. He looked at me. "Piper," he whispered. The microphone on the podium caught it. It was a small, broken sound. "What have you done?" I balanced the books, I said. And then I dropped the mic. It hit the floor with a heavy peaches. Final thud. The feedback loop was gone. The only sound left was the ruin of the Sterling family name. Anthony didn't just break, he snapped. The shame burned off the last of his facade, leaving only raw, violent desperation. He jumped off the stage, stumbling in his expensive shoes, and lunged toward me. "You ungrateful little traitor," he screamed, his hands reaching for my throat. "I made you. I own you. You ruined us." He covered half the distance between us. He never made it to the second half. The double doors at the back of the ballroom didn't just open, they were thrown wide. "Federal agents, nobody move." The shout was louder than the microphone feedback had been. 6 men and women in dark windbreakers moved into the room with practiced efficiency. They weren't hotel security. They weren't local police. On the back of their jackets, in bold yellow letters, was the acronym that makes billionaires weep. IRSCI, Criminal Investigation Division. The crowd gasped and scattered, pressing themselves against the walls to distance themselves from the blast radius. Anthony froze, his hands still raised in claws, staring at the badges moving toward him. He looked back at me, his eyes wide with a new kind of horror. "Piper, you didn't. I didn't just make a slideshow." "Anthony," I said, my voice cutting through the chaos. "I filed a whistleblower report 3 weeks ago. The ledger isn't just a presentation. It's Evidence Exhibit A." "Ms. Sterling?" Stepping up to my side. "That's me," I said, "the primary witness." I watched as they cuffed Anthony first. He didn't fight. He just sagged, deflated. A balloon pricked by a needle. Susan was sobbing, begging them not to ruin her dress. Brittany was holding her phone, trying to live stream her own arrest until an agent firmly took it from her hand. I reached up to my neck. I unclasped the neon green lanyard. The cheap polyester scratched my skin one last time. I walked over to where Anthony stood, flanked by agents. I let the lanyard drop. It landed right next to his polished shoes. "Here's your support staff," I said. I didn't wait for a response. I turned and walked out of the ballroom. I walked past the frozen donors, past the terrified board members, past the ruin of the life they had tried to chain me to. I stepped out into the cool night air. The ocean breeze didn't smell like desperation anymore. It smelled like salt and freedom. The valet brought my car around. It was a modest sedan, bought with my own money, registered in my own name, paid for with clean, honest work. I tipped him $50 and slid into the driver's seat. I didn't look back at the country club. I didn't look back at the flashing blue lights reflecting off the grand entrance. I put the car in drive and pulled onto the highway. The rearview mirror was empty. The road ahead was wide open. Sometimes, the only way to win is to stop playing their game and start playing by the law. If you've ever had to be the villain in their story, to be the hero in yours, share this video. You are not alone.